Now let's switch gears and start talking about some creative drum processing. So first, our drum loop is going to sound like this. So a simple 707 drum machine loop, and then after, it's going to be a little bit more saturated, a bit thicker, and also have a little bit of stereo widening. So this is something that's a lot more interesting to play around with your production. From here, you can go ahead and layer in additional effects and saturate it. And what this does, it just adds a little bit more interest to that whole patch. This is kind of an updated version of some drum processing that I made in my previous guitar rig course with Groove 3, using some of the new devices and showing you some cool ways of layering and thickening up drum machine samples. You could also do this for practically anything else as well. So you could do this on synthesizers or interesting like acoustic drum sounds as well. But here we'll just be using a drum machine. So we go ahead and fold it up. I'll open up the blank copy of Guitar Rig. We'll drag and drop that in. And then go ahead and set that to stereo and turn on the gate. And actually for this patch, what I want to do that's a little bit different is I just want to make sure that this is mono. So it should be mono by default because it is just a 707 drum machine. But in case those samples have any stereo width baked into them, I'm going to go ahead and put this over to left so that way we're only grabbing one channel of audio. And the reason we're doing this is because I want to add in some stereo widening from some delays. So we're going to use a ping pong delay that's also saturated to add in just a little bit more width to my sound. So the first thing that we're going to add in is actually going to be the Psyche delay. So let me go ahead and drag and drop that in. And the reason we're going to do this is because we can actually pitch shift this delay and then blend in a pitch shifted copy into our main signal. So by itself, it just sounds kind of like a psychedelic 70s delay. The interesting thing happens when I go to this pitch shift and I put this down. So this is a semitone pitch shift, so we're going to put that down 1 octave, which is 12 semitones. Listen to what this sounds like. So it's giving us this weird textured delay sound. If I put the mix all the way up to 100%, you can just hear just that tone. But the cool thing is it's also super crunchy as well. So what we can do is make this more of like a pitch shifted effect that's not quite as delayed. So I'm going to take that So I'm going to take the feedback all the way down, and then I'm going to go to my time value and put that down as low as it goes. And right there, we get a much more interesting tone for my whole sound. So check the expanded menu. I'll probably turn down some of that cross modulation. Kind of cleans it up just a little bit. And also the left and right offset. And by the way, on a lot of the devices, there's this kind of extended advanced menu that you can select via this button. So if you see this control popping up on the various different guitar rig effects devices, go ahead and click on it, and there's sometimes some extended options available. So by itself, that would actually be a super interesting sound. But what we're going to do is blend that in with my main drums. So what that's doing is thickening up and almost saturating and distorting it simultaneously. So that's all for that main delay. We're using that almost like a pitch shifter and a saturator. Now let's go ahead and add in some distortions. We'll use the color module. Click on that, drag and drop that in, and we'll leave that on the solid console. So that way it's emulating the saturation and distortion from an SSL recording console. You can just saturate that to taste. That sounds nice at about 25. Let's also see what the bass saver does, see if that kind of enhances the low end of my sound. So I think I actually like how that saturates the low end and it sort of folds back into itself, making it a little bit more of like a transient percussive sound. I think that's kind of nice. Let's also take the low end and boost that just a little bit. So we'll do like 1.60 to get just a touch more sub bass out of my drums. So it's really thickening it up without that pitch shifter. Sort of get interesting tones. Maybe even add a little feedback and some time variation. Probably add just a touch more of that left and right offset, actually. It might be kind of interesting. So a little bit of feedback, a little bit of left and right offset, but not too much of it. There we go. So like at 0.99, so almost all the way down, it's a little bit more interesting. Almost adds like this weird spatial effect to it. Now let's go ahead and add in some compression and saturation with one single device, and that's going to be the Supercharger GT. let's go to Dynamics, and let's grab the GT, which is the enhanced version of that compressor. This is just like the regular compressor. This has some more advanced options for saturation and distortion. And let's go ahead and compress our signal. So by default, with the gain staging, it should actually be doing a little bit of compression. I just want like a dB or two. Let's make this go through the slam mode so it's super snappy. Play around with some of these effects up here. Then we can go ahead and saturate this. So what that's doing is adding just a little bit of compression. It's an ultra snappy compression, but what that's doing is just adding a touch more transients. Then the main character of the sound is coming from this saturation. Then it's time to add in that kind of widened effect, which we're doing some of with this delay up here, but let's add in a secondary delay to add an additional widening and modulation to my drum loop. So we'll grab that Replica GT delay, because this one has quite a bit more advanced options. Should be perfect for this type of sound. I want that to be on the vintage digital mode. So that way it's kind of a more textured lo-fi digital delay. It'd be perfect for our sound. You can hear there's already a really nice sound to that delay, even on its default state. Let's change that over to the ping pong mode. So that way it pans the delay left and right. And let's leave this on milliseconds. So that way we can make this super short. This will take some playing around with the feedback control to get it to be set right, to get the right type of tone. And right now you're already getting that like kind of reverb. Already off to a nice start. Let's maybe add in just a little bit of depth modulation. So that way we have a little bit more depth inside of our drums. Then we can play around with that mix control to get that taste. Maybe filter out just a little bit of those lows too, everything below like 30, just so we don't get any weird phasing issues. So if you want a lot of this, you could always increase that dry wet. Gives you like a really 80s sounding drum loop. I think I like it at about 8. Maybe a touch more compression. And a touch more saturation. So altogether, our final drum loop sounds like this. Whereas before, it sounded like this. So we've added a lot of interesting saturation and texture. Then we've also added some weird widening effects as well to our sound. So that way it pushes the sound a little bit wider. It just makes it a little bit more textured and interesting. Alternatively, if you'd like this delay to be a little bit more tucked behind the main section of the drums, you could open up the advanced menus and then enable the ducking control. So what that'll do is basically have this suck behind the main drum sound as it's playing. And then whenever there's gaps in the audio, it'll bring up the volume of that delay. So if we increase the sensitivity, crank the amount up just a little bit, makes that effect a little bit more subtle. So it just depends on what you're going for. But for me, I like it kind of being a little bit more out in front of the whole thing. So it just depends on what you're going for. But if you're finding that isn't working for your production, you want this to be a little bit more subtle of an effect, feel free to mess around with the ducking controls. All right, so that's all for this creative drum patch. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one.